Hello everyone, I'm Jonathan Little for PokerNews.com. Today we have a hand from the World Series of Poker Main Event where, well, we see the flop, we make two pair, and it gets really, really dicey. Before we get there, if you like my content, click like, click subscribe, I would appreciate it. Here, we're facing a limp, a raise to 750 chips, a call from the player on the button, and now it's on me with Jack 10 of diamonds and the small blind. This is a hand that we really want to see the flop with. Now, I know we're out of position. You do not love being out of position. You would much prefer to be in position, but you don't always get to have the best position or the best cards. Sometimes you have to play in slightly marginal scenarios. And I think this is definitely a spot to call. The only time I would ever fold in this spot is if I knew with a high degree of certainty that under the gun +1 was going for a limp re-raise, but I have no reason to think that. So we're going to call. We're going to see the flop. And then we get a pretty nice flop. It comes Jack 10-9. Two hearts. We have top two pair. But, whenever the board contains three cards to a straight that are all connected, or maybe even with one gap somewhere in there, you have to be very, very cautious because it's very likely that if a lot of money goes in the pot, you're against a straight or a set, or in this case, because there's a flush draw available, a very good draw. So even though we have top two pair, a pretty strong hand, we have to be careful if a lot of money goes in the pot. So in this scenario, should we check or should we lead? I typically do not lead in scenarios that should be good for the pre-flop raiser. And if you think about the pre-flop raiser's range, it should contain aces, kings, queens, jacks, tens, nines, king, queen, king, jack, right? It should contain a lot of hands that connect very well with this board. So you have to expect the low jack to be betting this scenario somewhat frequently. Also, all these other players could connect with this board as well. So this is actually a spot where I'm going to be checking with my entire range. So I check. The initial limper, who limp called, now leads for 1,200. You have to think this is typically going to be on the weaker side. Low jack calls, probably being cautious with some sort of decently strong made hand. If they fold to me here, I'll probably go ahead and put in the raise. You have to think, given this action, we probably have the best hand. If we raise and somehow get re-raised, like say I make it 5,500 and someone makes it 15,000, we'll just fold. We'll get out of the way. But given the small bet and the call, I would probably go ahead and put in the raise. But now, that play gets ruined when a tight player on the button raises to 4,000. Okay. So now the situation has changed substantially because the player on the button has raised to an amount that actually isn't all that big. Notice that both players, under the gun +1 and the low jack, are going to be getting excellent odds to call, which means that the player on the button raising simply must have a very strong hand if they have any amount of competence whatsoever. Because they're saying, I'm going to give you great odds and you still can't beat me. Whenever you make that announcement, I'm going to give you great odds and you still can't beat me, it's usually, not always, but usually the sign of a very, very strong hand. So what's a very, very strong hand on Jack 10-9? Well, it's going to be straights and sets. How does my Jack 10 do against straights and sets? Turns out, not so great. I'm basically dead. I mean, to be fair, I could drill a Jack or a 10, but it's kind of unlikely that happens, especially given one of these two players very easily could have a Jack or a 10, or both of them could. So I think we have a pretty easy fold. This two pair went from being a reasonably strong made hand when we saw the flop to now, given this action, I think it's become essentially a bad bluff catcher. And do I think these players are bluffing too often early in the World Series of Poker main event? I do not. I think they may be overvaluing hands, but I don't think they're just running big multi-way bluffs for no reason. So what do? We take our hand and we deposit it into the muck. Let's see how it ends. Both players call. Turns a 2 of hearts, so the flush gets there. Check, check, check. River's another 2. Under gun +1 bets 3,500. Low jack folds. Player on the button calls. And they're not going to show you the cards. But I actually remember the cards. Player under the gun +1 had 10-9. Substantially overplaying. Decided to, I guess, I don't even know what he's doing on the river. Bluffing it? Again, this player just doesn't know what they're doing. Remember, they limp 10-9. They bet into people on this awful board. They called a raise. This person doesn't know what they're doing. This type player on the button ended up having 8-7 of spades. So roughly a bluff catcher by the river as well. But as we see, I was in pretty bad shape on the flop, and we elected to sidestep it. This is something you must become good at if you're going to be playing multi-way pots. I know that bomb pots have become very popular in live poker and cash games. That's usually when the dealer changes or something happens, maybe every hour or something like that, everyone puts in some number of big blinds and they just put out a flop. So you have to play 9 or 10-way poker. Turns out most people are not very good at 9 or 10-way poker. They think that hands like, well, Jack 10 on this flop are great. Like, yes, Jack 10 on this flop, without realizing they're against 7, 8, 9 other random hands. And if some other random hand is trying to put their money in on Jack 10, 9, how do you feel about your Jack 10, 9 then? Turns out you really should not feel all that great about it. Whenever you're playing multi-way pots, if it's clear multiple people are trying to get lots of money in the pot, you need an incredibly, incredibly, incredibly strong hand to stick around. And if you stack off too loosely in multi-way pots, that's going to result in you just spewing away your chips over and over again, especially in the early levels of tournaments, where quite often you do see more multi-way pots than in the later stages, or as stacks get shallower. So anyway, we sidestep this one. We lose a whopping 5 big blinds with our Jack 10 suited when we flop top pair, and we get to continue grinding. So that's going to be it for today. Thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it. I hope you know that. I really do appreciate you and everything you do to help me live the life of my dreams. Without you, I would not be here. So thank you very much. I appreciate you. Good luck in your games. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you next time.